right, everyone. Hello again. Welcome to the Sicstringcanvas podcast. And I am your host, Dan Chun. And today I'm really excited because we have an amazing guest. He is a musician, he is a guitarist, he's an artist, writer, biographer, columnist for Guitar World magazine, among other things, I'm sure. This is Andy Aledort.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much again for coming on.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that I'm missing? Do you care to fill in the blank for the guests, for the listeners rather?
Well, I have an online classroom with a company called TrueFire, which I think some of your listeners have probably heard of. TrueFire is a guitar lesson platform that has literally 75,000 lessons up there or something crazy like that. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of great teachers, people like Robin Ford and Josh Smith and Dweezil Zappa and Larry Carlton, and you have a wonderful roster of guitarists who have created, many of them have created multiple series. David Grissom, a series of instructional courses. So I have a classroom called Total Guitar Masterclass that's part of TrueFire, and people can take lessons from me through TrueFire, or they could just contact me through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter if they want personal lessons, via Zoom or Skype. So, but the TrueFire thing is cool, the classroom's cool, and then overall, it's a great resource for, backing tracks and just about every style of music, guitar related, for learning purposes and other purposes. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's good to know that you're offering this because for me personally, as someone who's been playing the guitar for many, many years, we're close to some of my admirers, including yourself. But I have been playing a long time, and I consider myself to have had two guitar teachers. One is my friend Kyle, who started out as my guitar teacher. I've been taking lessons from him for a long time, up till 2013. But then my second one is actually you, believe it or not. Even though this is the first time we're meeting, I've been a long time subscriber to Guitar World, and I've purchased all of your instructional DVDs.
Oh wow!
And I still go back to them once in a while. I mean, if there's a song, if for people who don't know, pretty much every tab or for songs that are on Guitar World, it's like pretty much you who does all of it. Is that true?
A lot of them, yeah. And before that, Guitar for the Practicing Musician, I was there for 10 years, 1985 through 1994. And then I went over to Guitar World in 94, and I'm still there, 27 years later. And a lot of books, through the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, there was still a market for transcription books. So it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I've done hundreds of transcription books. Somebody on Instagram posted a picture of the 4 albums that they were listening to, and one of them was Yngwie Malmsteen anthology, and one of them was Crystal Planet, Joe Satriani, and one of them was a Greg Howe record, and I can't remember what the other record was. It was another sort of shred, and I just wrote on it was on Twitter. I think I've transcribed at least 3 of those records that you're listening to. So there was a lot of that for years, a lot of transcribing, and those transcriptions, live on. So Guitar World has this library that they can, there's a lot of great songs that people are always going to want to learn. There's always new guitar players coming along who don't really know that Keith Richards tuned to open G and
Mhm.
played those licks in a certain way, or Eddie Van Halen techniques or whatever it might be. So that's the beauty of this stuff is great music is always going to be great. In fact, it's going to get better over time, and I'm happy uh, that the transcriptions are still out there and the books are out there and that people are still checking them out. I'm very happy to hear that it's been helpful to you over all these years. And there's quite if you bought all the DVDs, that's a lot of DVDs.
Maybe not all of them, but quite a bit. I got like the blues. It's not the shredding, but it's like if you want to learn how to play lead, there's these exercises.
Yeah,
Play the rock. There's quite a few.
there are quite a few.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
they were like I don't know, 18 or 22 or something that I just did for Guitar World.
Mm.
And there was like another dozen that I did for True Fire. And then there was a handful that I did for Hal Leonard, like how to play like Albert King, how to play like B.B. King, how to play like Charlie Christian. Um, and then the books. I did a lot of transcription books that came with CDs where I recreated to the best of my ability, guitar playing of the guitar player. So the most successful one of those books was called Jimi Hendrix Signature Licks,
Mm.
and and with all my instructional stuff, I want the musical examples to sound not only as close as possible to the records, but to sound like music. Like when you listen to it, hopefully you get the same or close to the level of enjoyment and interest that you're going to get from the original music. Because that was one thing I felt when I first got involved in creating instructional materials that oftentimes the music part, the thing that keeps people engaged, was kind of missing. It would either be too academic or the guitar tones were not, you know, very alluring. Uh, so I found in my own experience that if it sounded like it had the same feeling or as close as possible, whether it be Jimi Hendrix or Jeff Beck or Leslie West or Johnny Winter, mostly blues rock, Eric Clapton. Like I
Mhm.
did a book called Eric Clapton Blues Man and did everything from the Yardbirds to Blues Breakers to Cream to beyond. And but that was the goal, was for it to sound like you were listening to the record. Like it has that feeling in it. And I went to whatever extremes I could go to. The Hendrix stuff, I'm using a 100-watt super lead Marshall through 412 bottom, and it's mic'd a certain way, and different Stratocasters. And for the blues rock Guitar Masters book, or actually to go back to the Clapton Bluesman book, I'd use a Telecaster on the Yardbird stuff, and a combination of SG, vintage SG and 335, and a Les Paul Custom, old one, and an old Les Paul Standard for all the Blues Breakers and Cream stuff.
Mm.
And so, Maple Neck Strat for the Derek and the Domino stuff. Like I really did what I could so that when you listen to it, it had that same something of the sensibility, the quality. And one way, I mean, it paid off in the sense of, people have commented that it made the books more enjoyable to learn from because it felt like you're listening to music. It kept, it was
Right.
musically inspiring, which is what it needs to be. But another little spin-off of that is when I was first getting to know the guys that played with Steve Ray Vaughan, Tommy Shannon, the bassist, and Chris Layton.
Mm.
When Stevie was alive, I'd interview Stevie, and I got to know him. And but if I saw Chris Layton and Tommy Shannon, it would just be like, hey, like a wave for a second, like I didn't know them. It certainly wouldn't be to interview them. But then Stevie died, and so I interviewed them a few times because of that. And then all their subsequent projects, Archangels, which they did with Doyle Bramhall and Charlie Sexton. This is Chris Layton and Tommy Shannon of Double Trouble. Then they had a band called Storyville with David Grissom and David Holt on guitar and Malford Milligan singing. And so somewhere toward the late 90s, so I would interview them for all these projects and was getting to know them better. And somewhere in there, I started to send them recordings of myself. And one of the things I sent to Tommy was, I don't know, maybe it was Red House from the Hendrix Signature Licks book. And he freaked out. He thought it was Hendrix. Like, he couldn't believe it wasn't Hendrix. He was like, really? Like, this isn't the he thought it was the record. And so from that, they started to hire me to do some recordings with them and to play some shows with them. And so, of course, the relationship just continued to grow over the years. And all of that material, all that time, which is many years, if we go back to when I first met Stevie, it's 35 years, was substantive material that helped to write the book that I wrote about Steve Ray Vaughan. So anyway, I was a guitar player first, before I wrote for any magazines or did any instructional stuff. I always played guitar and taught, going back to when I was, a relatively young teenager. So those things always felt natural to me, playing and teaching. And the advent of guitar magazines in the 80s sort of led to, this explosion of guitar transcriptions and writing and becoming an editor. And all of a sudden I had to learn how to be a writer. So
you're pretty good at that as well. I mean, we'll get to that with the book. I have read it. It's an amazing book. But I'm really glad that you mentioned about the importance of trying to go through all the nitty-gritty details of sounding like these artists, because if there's one thing among many things that I can credit my friend / guitar teacher has taught me when he was teaching me how to play, is not only the technical stuff and the theory, but he really taught me how to appreciate these artists that you're talking about. He's like, okay, he would make me listen to a song, and he says, like, where this is coming from, like this so-and-so artist, like Stevie Ray. When he played Stevie Ray, it's like, okay, well, he sounds like that because he was a huge Albert King fan. And right. If you want to, so like, I think for me, he got me hooked on John Mayer. And he said, well, John Mayer was influenced by Stevie, and now he's playing a little bit more. He came out with this Continuum album, so he was playing it a bit more BB and all that, and Clapton. So he says, if you really want to learn how to play, listen. So that's when I was introduced to some of your magazines and like your DVDs, and you really specified, okay, here's, and like you mentioned, like you had these instructions how to sound like Hendrix, how to sound like, like how to sound like Clapton. And
or at least get in the ballpark. Yes, all of these people we're talking about are these tremendous figures in music, and no one's going to sound exactly like them. And it's silly to think that you're going to sound exactly like them, but it's great to be influenced by them and like you say, use your ear and fine tune your ear. And so in the case of Stevie, his two biggest influences were Jimi Hendrix and Albert King. And so nobody really got closer to being able to do that Albert King thing than Stevie. But it's still Stevie. No one's going to sound more like Albert King than Albert King. And that's true for everybody.
Right.
But Stevie does an incredible B.B. King. Like when he wants to sound like B.B. King, it's like you can't believe it.
I'm sure he can.
And he does it a little. Like if you watch the version of Tightrope from Austin City Limits from 1989, the whole outro solo, he goes into his sort of BB vibrato and these very specific, what we call the BB box.
Oh my
And
goodness, the BB box. Like those terms, like that's something I had to learn. The BB box, and Albert has a box too. And then just knowing that and then going in deep with like some of the stuff that you were teaching.
yeah,
Uh,
you listen for the touch and the
yeah,
in the it's really a fun. Some of it is just sort of archaeological, like a historical dig where, oh, what kind of strings is this guy using and what's his tuning, and the instrument's definitely important, but is he picking with his fingers? Is he using finger picks? Is he using
right.
a flat pick? Um, what string gauges? It's really amazing. And I guess the main point of it all is that uh, you'll never run out of stuff to investigate
Absolutely.
if you're really interested, and if you get can draw inspiration from discovering new music, then
Mhm.
you will never ever run out of places to draw new inspiration. Like, for example, there are these records, and when I was a kid, I mean, they weren't even well known, but I guess one of my friends had one of them, which is usually what it's like, and in those days, they were just vinyl records that, like, you're either you had to own it or your buddy had to own it. You're not going to be able to go find it on your phone. Nobody was carrying phones around in those days, you know, let alone phones that could play music all day long and any song that you can think of. So there was a series of records. I don't know if they were on Vanguard. I'm not sure. Chicago, the Blues Today, and there's 3 volumes. And so I think a buddy of mine had one, and then I went to the record store looking for Chicago, the Blues Today, and discovered that there was more than one volume. And so it's like there'll be like a couple Otis Rush songs, a couple Magic Sam songs, a couple Homesick James songs. Homesick James was Elmore James' brother, you know. So even that is like, if you don't know Elmore James, well, then there's all of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot. But if you do, and then you find out about that he had a brother who made really good records, then it's like, oh, Homesick James. Um, and the other thing I would say is that I've had the benefit of interviewing so many of my favorite guitar players over all these years.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, so like, for instance, BB King is somebody that I've interviewed many times, and you couldn't find a nicer, more generous person ever, you know.
Mm.
Um, and so he told me that when he was young, like before he recorded, he took some lessons from Robert Nighthawk. Now, Robert Nighthawk was a Chicago blues musician, um, who certainly never got well known, in any kind of large sense, scale sense. And there aren't a lot of Robert Nighthawk records. There's a few. But there is a record called Live on Maxwell Street, and some of the songs are him. But the most amazing thing is you could go on YouTube and put in Robert Nighthawk, Maxwell Street, and there's a movie that was made in 1965, and I think Mike Bloomfield was involved, because whoever made the movie said, we need somebody who knows who knows what the hell this whole Chicago blues thing is about. Get Mike. He knows. So
It's,
anyway, so you can watch on film
uh,
Robert Nighthawk playing this song that has 3 different names, going down to Eli's, and it's also called "I'm Gonna Murder My Baby," which is the more well-known name. Um, and it was mind-blowing to me because I heard the recording of it, like, I don't know how many years ago, but it wasn't, like, relatively speaking, it was like 25 years ago. But BB King told me he took lessons from Robert Nighthawk, And he said, "Well, my fingers." This is what BB King said. "My fingers were too stupid to be able to replicate Robert's vibrato, so I had to come up with my own vibrato." And I said, "BB, I hate to break it to you, but your vibrato is like really good. I don't know if you know that. There's like a few people like Clapton and Hendrix, who you may have heard of them. They really tried hard to make their vibrato sound like yours. And but that's just gives you an idea of the kind of guy BB King was. That's the way he described it. My fingers were too stupid
Wow.
to sound like Robert Nighthawk. But if you do listen to Robert Nighthawk, he plays wearing a slide, so he's alternating all the time between picking in a standard traditional way,
You play with
fingers on
the
the string.
wah-wah as well? Slide with the wah-wah?
No, you're thinking of Earl Hooker. But Earl Hooker did the same thing. Earl Hooker played with a slide on and
Okay,
would
okay.
alternate back and forth between using the slide and fretting with his fingers. And the slide solo that Robert Nighthawk plays on Going Down to Eli's from Maxwell Street, it's just unreal. And his vibrato is incredible. And the fact that you can watch it, he's just sitting there on the corner. It's like him and another guitar player and a guy like hitting a snare drum. And it's like the greatest thing you ever heard. And so when I heard it, the first thing I recognized was that Mick Taylor based his whole slide vibrato on Robert Nighthawk because
Mm.
I don't think Mick would disagree with that. Because it's like if you think of Love in Vain by the Rolling Stones from Get Your Yayas Out and the way Mick Taylor plays his solo and the vibrato that he uses, or the way Mick Taylor plays slide on All Down the Line from Exile on Main Street. That's like the Robert Nighthawk thing. So that's just one example of there's hundreds and hundreds of these things. If you're, you have an inquisitive mind as a musician and a guitar player, all of these things are going to be inspiring.
So I know you've also have an extensive career recording, playing music. You mentioned that you toured with Dickie Betts. You've been part of the Experience Hendrix tour.
That's right.
Who were your influences growing up?
Well, I was born in 1956. I'm 64 now, and my mother had been a singer, and she played piano, and we had a piano in the house, and so from my earliest memories, there was always a lot of music in the house, and she particularly liked to sing and play jazz standards. So she loved Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald.
Hmm.
Um, and like I remember when Tony Bennett Left My Heart in San Francisco came out, like it was a new album in 1961 or 2 or something. And I loved it. Like I thought Tony Bennett was amazing. Like she put it on, and this is all before the Beatles.
Right.
And but she also had some blues records. Like it was interesting. She had a Lead Belly record, and she had Josh White and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. She had these records, and so I'm hearing all this stuff, and I wasn't playing an instrument yet, but there was a guitar in the house that my mother had bought before I was born, and so the guitar was there. It was like this sort of magical thing over there in the box,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to be, awakened. And and then, uh, listening to a lot of AM radio and the Beach Boys, and um, you know, there. My point is only that there was this foundation that was sort of already there before the Beatles, which was this like nuclear explosion. So the part of that foundation was everything I just described, and then like the music, kids music of the late '50s, whether it was Jerry Lee Lewis or Little Richard or Elvis Presley or doo-wop, like
Mm-hmm.
Earth Angel, the Penguins and the Five Satins, and this is the kind of stuff like my babysitters in there. It was like American Graffiti, the boyfriends had their hair greased back and the cigarettes rolled up in their short sleeve of their white t-shirts.
James.
I remember that. Yeah, but that we're talking like 1962. Then the Beatles show up on Ed Sullivan in February of '64, and it's just
Huge.
it's just and then the whole British invasion, like in a very short order. You've got the Rolling Stones, and you've got the Who, and you've got the Kinks, and then you've got the American counterparts to those bands. That some people may think are corny. Well, I shouldn't leave out Dave Clark Five, another British invasion band, Herman's Hermits, um, but like Paul Revere and the Raiders, or actually, this is another English band, the Animals. Um, but I think like it was like '66. Like by the time you get to '66, I'm 10, and it's like Bob Dylan and the Doors, and then the Beatles are doing Revolver and Tomorrow Never. Like it's like, and then it must be stated that the late '60s, the '60s and late '60s, the counterculture, which is what it was called, is cultural revolution, youth culture, which is what all these things are, was very tied to civil rights, and as we know, civil rights uh, was very closely tied to the folk movement in music, because they were bringing back blues artists, and there was a lot of protest songs. Like that's the springboard for Bob Dylan's career, was things related to social justice and the connection to Woody Guthrie, and you know how can a poor man survive, and this land is your land, and like an awareness to society, the connection between music and society, and a just society, um, and civil rights. So all of these things, when you're 12, it's a pretty intoxicating mix of the gravity of it all, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like there was a difference, when Bob Dylan did like a Rolling Stone, or Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues Again, or something like that, or Sad Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. Um, it was, a lot different than Paul Revere and the Raiders. Nothing against Paul Revere and the Raiders, because I like those records, but um, this awareness to music and art had the power to reflect and direct what people thought, and just uh, just even the idea that there are different viewpoints that people could have on everything. And so, you know, people were investigating Eastern religion, and books like Be Here Now, Baba Ram Das, who was Richard Alpert, who did all the LSD uh, experiments, or whatever you want to call it, the scientific endeavors with Timothy Leary, um, the influence of Eastern culture, and um, meditation, and different views on religion. And, you know what I mean? Like this is really a lot there. And I mean, the Who, Pete would talk about that it wasn't just about writing a song. You know, that was sort of the whole impetus for Tommy, was that a deaf, dumb, and blind kid could become the spiritual leader. And it was all very tongue in cheek, you know, sort of like the first point of it was, they say you're going to go to hell unless you recognize God. You know, that's what he grew up with. And his question was, yeah, but if you're deaf, dumb, and blind, does that mean you're going to go to hell? Because how are you going to learn about God? You know, you're deaf, dumb, and blind.
Hmm.
So it seems that would be a little unfair. And so Tommy, who's deaf, dumb, and blind, ends up becoming a religious leader himself. And that's sort of the satirical twist of the whole thing, is maybe it's all a bunch of malarkey in the first place, you know? Like if the guy who is going to be miss out on absolution because he's of his handicaps,
Mm-hmm.
well, then it doesn't matter. He becomes a spiritual leader anyway, and people elevate him to sainthood. You know, it was like all the big joke. And then Pete tried to do this thing, as you may know, any Who fans out there, a project called Lifehouse, and it was just too abstract for even the guys in the band to know what the hell he was talking about. But he was writing some really good songs, all of which ended up on Who's Next, which is
Right.
like one of the best rock albums of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So Won't Get Fooled Again, Bob O'Reilly, and
All right.
Bargain, like they're all kind of about the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in Bargain, I'd rather lose me to find you. I'd rather give up all I had. You know, to catch you, I'm gonna run and never stop. Like I call that a bargain, the best I ever had. You know, we don't really know what he's talking about, but it's just about the quest, right? And so they were like, well, screw it. We can't make heads or tails out of what the hell Pete's talking about. So we'll just put them all on a record, and Who's Next comes out. And of course, it's like the greatest album in the world. But then he got it together, his idea, and that became Quadrophenia, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which was, from four comes one. Meet, which is what the Who was. Like if you take away any of the four, there is no one, which is the Who. The Who doesn't exist unless it's those four guys. So that's what the whole nature of Quadrophenia is, a a quantitative entity is recognizable from the four.
Mm-hmm.
But because he's Pete, he turned it into someone who's not schizophrenic. They're quadrophrenic. You know, they have four distinct personalities, which was just his twist on what it's like being in a band.
You know, I'm glad that we're talking about this because I was born in '82, so I wasn't alive when when Hendrix was playing or anything like. But I mean, I know what I've studied, and I know what I'm even learning now. I didn't know what the meaning behind, like, say, the album Tommy was. Um, and this is not a knock on, by all means, this is not a knock on music today. But at the same time, I'm thinking out loud. Do you think that a lot of these artists that have made such a cultural impact in the past are somewhat being forgotten by today's generation? And do you think what can we, and if so, what can we do to kind of keep their legacy alive? Right. I mean, like, I don't even think people knew what Jimi Hendrix was doing when he played the Star-Spangled Banner. They just hear a lot of noise, but wasn't
Well,
he?
yeah, but think about it. You know, now, like just the other day, um, there's a kid on Long Island who's a good friend of mine, Brandon Niederauer, Taz Niederauer, played the Star Spangled Banner. Um, I can't remember what. I think it was the Green Bay Packers playoff game
Mhm.
um, against Tampa Bay, and he's 16 or 17 now. And so, of course, he played it in a Jimi Hendrix style. And so now it's totally accepted that it's an acceptable and beloved approach to the Star-Spangled Banner to do what Hendrix did, which at the time he did it, he was vilified and criticized.
Right. Yeah.
So I think he won, the argument. Because people now, I could tell you what, a gig that I did once that stays in my mind is, it was about 25 years ago or something. And I was asked to play this benefit, and we were going to play on this boat. And we set up on the roof of the boat. It wasn't like a gigantic yacht or anything. In fact, I think it was the same boat that's in the movie The Perfect Storm, the same kind of boat. So it's a boat that can hold about 20 people, 25 people at the most, but it's not a giant boat. And we had to set up on the roof, which was sort of funny because when the boat would turn, you didn't want to fall off the boat. But it was a foundation, a fundraising foundation, a charity for an education fund for the children of special ops soldiers that have been killed in duty, like the SEALs and guys like that. And so most of the people on the boat were military people. And, I could tell you they were the greatest people, all these people. So it was out on the end of Long Island in Sag Harbor. And in the harbor, it was also, whatever year it was, believe it or not, the 300th anniversary of the Sag Harbor Fire Department. And they claim they're the first fire department in the United States. And the Plymouth Rock people claim they were the first one. So they've always had a little argument about who started first. 300 years and 2 months, or 300 years and 3 months. And so we were sailing around Sag Harbor, just playing on top of the boat. But at 9 o'clock that night, it was for 4th of July, they were going to do this gigantic fireworks exhibition. And out here, there's a family, the Grucci's. The Grucci's always do the fireworks, and it's like state of the art, like insane fireworks, crazy. But for the first time in my life, the only time, all the fireworks barges were around us, like in a circle, and we were in the center. So now 9 o'clock comes, and all of these, fireworks are blowing up right over our heads. And these guys and their wives, they said, listen, when the fireworks, start, we want you to play the Star-Spangled Banner like Hendrix.
Wow.
And so I turned everything on my amp on 10 and turned all my pedals up to 10. And I'm playing and looking over my head and these explosions. And it was very moving, and people were crying,
I mean, thanks for sharing with me the story about that young man who was only not even in his 20s, aware of playing the Star-Spangled Banner in the style of hand. I mean, that's really encouraging. And then the story that you shared about yourself, that must have been amazing.
And people were crying. It was very emotional. It was. I think it's a really important thing for, especially in light of recent events, for people to not ignore the gravity of the social world on a grander scale. I mean, COVID has made everybody think about that too. As simple as, are you going to run around with no mask on and risk the health of other people? Like you're sort of socially irresponsible, right? Like every person is a link in the chain, and the chain's only as strong as its weakest link. So, um, so there's an element of that. Um, I was going to say something else and I forgot what it was. But anyhow, uh, uh, I think it's. I'm saying I'm going to stay positive. I'm a positive person anyway. So I think that hopefully, Jimi Hendrix used to say, and this was in those days. He would say, "Well, we play this loud because there's a lot of sleeping people out there, and we're just trying to wake them up."
He is one of my if I had to name my favorite artist, I think Hendrix is up there. He is my absolute favorite artist. I have a picture like I'm looking at right now of him. Were you playing that Strat, the one that you're holding right now? You're well known. I noticed that you have like a favorite Strat. It almost looks like Stevie's
Right.
number one.
Yeah, this guitar I bought 48 years ago when I was 17, and it had already been stripped. It's a 1961 Strat, and so I had an electric guitar before that, a Univox Les Paul. It wasn't a very good guitar, and then I sold it for $150, and then this was at a music store for $350, and I talked the guy down to $275, and it's been my main guitar ever since. And for many, many, many years, it was the only electric guitar that I had. And then, in more recent years, like the last 20 some odd, but no, a little longer than that, 30 some odd years, I started to have some money to be able to buy some other instruments. But, this has been my main guitar. It is a lot like Stevie's guitar. It's a 61. Stevie's was a 62. It's funny. I like to say, I realized in writing the book about Steve Ray Vaughan, which we should talk about.
Yes.
I bought my 61 Strat in 1973, and Stevie bought his 62 Strat in 1974.
But yes, but his Strat, my understanding is it's an amalgamation. It's not. It's a parts
It's a
cap.
parts guitar. It's a parts guitar. The neck says 62 on it. The body says 63. It's written inside. But the pickups, and I think it's just a neck pickup, but I'm not sure, is written 1959. So Stevie would call his guitar 1959.
Right.
But it was not, because they didn't even start making rosewood board Stratocasters until 59 or 60. I'm not even 100% sure. It might be 60. And those were all slab board, what you call a slab board, where, for those who don't know, the neck itself, like the round part that your hand goes against in the back, is made of maple. But then the fingerboard, where the strings are, where you press down, if it's dark wood, that's generally rosewood, and they would glue a piece of rosewood to the maple. Glue, the what they call the fingerboard or the fretboard would be this piece of rosewood. And in 1960 and 61, the bottom of it, where it attached to the maple, was flat, completely flat, and then the maple was flat. So they call those slab boards because it's sort of like two slabs glued together. And when you look at the end of the fretboard where the neck joins the body, you could see that the bottom of the rosewood board is flat. It's a straight line. But then in 62, they switched to something called veneer boards. They would put the radius, the curve in the neck, on the piece of maple. And then the rosewood fingerboard that they would affix to the top of it would be curved in the same way. So the bottom of the piece of rosewood is curved, and those are called veneer boards. So Stevie's guitar was a veneer board. So it's later, it's 62. And so it's just a little bit different. But he played my guitar a lot of times, just about every time we get together. The first time he had his guitar and we jammed, which was really fun. But all the other times, I would bring my guitar and he would sit and play my guitar. And one of the last things he said to me was, he handed me my guitar back at the end of the interview. He said, "I still love your guitar." And everybody's played it, you know, Johnny Winter and Buddy Guy and B.B.
Oh, wow.
King and um, Dean DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots. So funny. I had this little plastic amp that actually sounded really good. That I should have had everybody sign because it would have been ridiculous. This little black plastic amp. It would have had like 100 silver Sharpie signatures of everybody on it. It's really a shame because it would have Stevie on there and BB, and I had Rush. I had Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee play through it at the same time because it had
Wow.
two inputs. So it was like listening to Rush on the radio with no drums. That's what it sounded like. But Dean DeLeo, Stone Temple Pilots, I handed him the guitar to do an interview with him, and then a lesson for Guitar World magazine. And he played for about 30 seconds, and he goes, "This is like the best rig I've ever played through. Like this guitar and that amp." He goes, "I'm going to hit you over the head with a chair and steal all your shit."
That's amazing. Did I want to get to I really want to get to the book Texas Flood. I read it. It's amazing. But before we do, I have to ask you. So I was listening to some of your music, and there's one particular song called "I've Got a Thing About You."
Oh, cool.
From your album, Put a Sock in It. I couldn't help but notice your tone almost has that thick Stevie voicing. Is that intentional? Has he been an influence in terms of your tone as well?
Well, Stevie's definitely been an influence on me, and I think Stevie influenced everybody just because, I mean, he had incredible tone.
Oh my goodness.
Incredible tone. Like, I mean, he had the best tone live I ever heard in my whole life, you know. And the first time I saw him was at this tiny club that was 5 minutes from where I live now, a famous club called My Father's Place in Roslyn, New York, that opened in 72 or 3 and got famous through the 70s because everybody would play there. Muddy Waters, and I saw Albert King there, and I saw Tommy Bolin there, and but he had a lot of reggae, like when reggae was new. Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and Burning Spear and Black Uhuru and bands like that. He was having them play, and reggae was like this. People didn't even know what it was. So anyway, I saw Stevie at My Father's Place. Holds like 250 people, and he already had the whole wall of amps. He had his 150-watt Dumble with a 412 bottom. He had his 200-watt Marshall Major and a 412 bottom. 2 Blackface Super Reverbs.
Wow.
His Vibra-Verb, 15-inch speaker. Unless that's the Vibralux. I always get confused. And a Vibratone, which was the cabinet with the spinning baffle in it to sound like a Leslie. And then a huge plexiglass wall in front of it so that it wouldn't kill everyone in the first 10 rows. But it was still the loudest thing I ever heard in my life. And the tone was insane. Like, it was just nuts. But, I had been playing guitar a long time by the time Stevie came along. And we were only a year and a few months apart in age. So it would be unfair to say that his sound didn't influence me. It did. Of course it did. His sound was amazing. But and you know what? Like, before that, because I was such a Hendrix fan and a Eric Clapton, Johnny Winter, Jeff Beck, all those guys played through Marshalls with 412 bottoms. And so, to be honest with you, I always played through a 412 bottom in all my bar bands, and then I got a Music Man HD 120 with combo, which is 212s like a Fender Twin. I had no interest in 10-inch speakers, playing through 10-inch speakers. But then Stevie always used a super reverb, you know, and so I started thinking, well, you know, maybe there's something to that. I shouldn't be like a 12-inch speaker snob. And so in '97, I got a Blackface Super, 1967 Blackface Super. And that's what you hear on Gotta Think About You. And
Oh,
so, and supposedly when Stevie showed up to do Let's Dance, they rented him a Blackface Super, and he just had his guitar, and he plugged in and he turned the amp on 10, you know. And so that's very much what you hear when you listen to Gotta Think About You. You know, my old Strat, my 61 Strat through a 67 Blackface Super.
it has such a
And
thick
so,
strategy. Like I don't know. For me personally, I find it hard just to find that sweet, thick sound on a Strat because it's generally a thin sounding guitar unless you're kind of like on neck and. But I don't
well,
know. You just
you got to turn up, you know, generally speaking. But you know, like for playing at home and doing instructional videos from home, you know, or teaching, the amp I'm playing through here is an incredible amp, so it's good to mention. Uh, it's a Bruno Underground 30, um, which they're very rare, made by this guy Tony Bruno, and it's like the, you know, flagship amp of all of his amps. He makes a
mm,
lot of great amps. He doesn't make too many amps anymore, but the Underground 30 is really cool. It's a 30-watt amp with EL84s like a Vox, but it's got three tens in it like a 1959 Bandmaster. But right now, for playing at home, I mean, the amp is on like one. So,
wow.
so I'm using a pedal to. So, you know, it's a convincing martially sound,
Yeah,
but it's really like speaking volume, you
that's
know.
on one.
The amp's on one.
Wow.
So the pedal is a pedal I got recently. Um, if you or your listeners are familiar with the guitarist Andy Timmons, who's a
Mm,
fantastic guitar player, he was in the band Danger Danger, and he's done a lot of different stuff, and he's really a fantastic guitarist, wonderful guy who's become a friend, and he's also now a columnist for Guitar World because I roped him into doing it. Um, and he has a pedal, signature pedal that he made with JHS. So this is the JHS AT Plus pedal, and I got it like 3 weeks ago. And I told Andy, I said, it's been on like since I took it out of the box. Like I never turned it off. Um, so, you know, a lot of what goes into tone though is in your fingers, um, and the way you touch the guitar and the strings. And playing with Dickie Betts, you know, like we would sit around playing solid body electric guitars not plugged in.
right.
But I could tell you, I had the experience of sitting with Steve Ray Vaughan playing a solid body electric guitar not plugged in, and Eddie Van Halen, and the sound coming off the guitar was almost the same. Like you didn't even need an amp. Like it
Mm,
was all the tone and the uh, distinct changes in frequency, you know, and the shape of the notes. It was in their fingers and the way they played. You could
mm.
hear it right off a solid body guitar. you know. It's like a really amazing amount of sound and tone in the fingers. So, got a thing about you from Put a Sock in It. That's just my super. Um, and I wasn't, and I think I'm using a tube screamer, but I wasn't going for a Stevie tone at all.
Okay.
But the Stevie tone sort of became a sort of accepted sort of, you know, something on the palette, you know, that we all knew. But it wasn't that different than the sound that I always played in the bands that I had. Like in the 70s, I had a blackface band, oh no, a silverface Bandmaster Top, 1972, that I played through a 412 bottom. Nobody used distortion pedals in those days. You just put your amp on 8 or 9 or 10.
Yeah.
You know, and the clubs were filled, so no one would ever tell you it was too loud. And it was loud, very loud. But, you know, for the longest time, Stevie too, like, I mean, like I said, we were almost the same age. You know, you turn your amp up, and there was no problem getting a fat sound out of a Stratocaster. You know, so anyway, for the solo, I got to think about you. I'm using my Univibe, which is like the Hendrix thing. So it definitely, I was definitely influenced. You know, I was sound wise, I was influenced more by Hendrix than anybody else. But Stevie was influenced by Hendrix a lot too.
Yeah. I really like to talk about your book, Texas Flood. Now, I read it. Now, I should preface this by saying I'm really glad that this book is out because I don't know, at least among my circle of people who talk and play guitar, I really feel that Stevie uh, is a little underrated in the sense, like, you know, when you think about the best guitarists ever, the usual suspects like Clapton, Beck, Hendrix, Page, Van Halen, whom we lost, rest in peace. I really think Stevie Ray Vaughan is up there.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are definitely people that agree with you.
Yeah, because and I'm glad that this book is out because I'm like, because when it came out, and I know, and it was really cool that I found out it was you who wrote it. I'm like, it's about time. It's like we really need to know more about this guy. And when I read it, um, my goodness, I enjoyed every you know, just every moment of reading it. It was wonderful. And I have to ask you, like, how did this, I guess, project? How did it start? How did it start?
Well, the way the actual writing of the book, you know, the things that laid the groundwork for it to happen, was that my friend Alan Paul, who was one of the writers, managing editor at one point for Guitar World magazine, you know, I moved over from practicing musician, guitar with the practicing musician, to Guitar World in '94, and so that's when I became friends with Alan. He had been writing for them. He's a little younger than me, so he'd been writing for them since '92 maybe, and so we've been friends for a really long time, you know, since then. And then in 2014, he put out a book. It was like a that he had assembled from interviews with all the different members of the Allman Brothers. And then once he knew he was going to make a book, he conducted new interviews just for the book, which is called, the book's called One Way Out, The Inside History of the Allman Brothers Band. And the book was published by St. Martin's Press, and it did very well and made the New York Times bestseller list. And unbeknownst to Alan, when he was working on the book, it was a very fortuitous turn of events that as soon as his book was coming out, the Allman Brothers declared that this was the last tour and they were done. And so he was able to, it helped promote his book, that the Allman Brothers were on their farewell tour. and he knew those guys, so he would go to the shows, and they all participated in the book, so they had some vested interest in the success of the book too. Like they knew Alan, so it wasn't something that they were against in any way. They loved it. They thought it was great. Anyway, the book did well, and so about it came out in 2014. So in 2000, end of 2016, beginning of 17, St. Martin's asked Alan if he wanted to write another book. He said he wanted to write a book about Steve Ray Vaughan, because the Allman Brothers were his favorite band. So it was a labor of love to write One Way Out for him. So he said he had to think of another artist that he cared about in that same way. And he said the first guy that came to mind was Stevie Ray Vaughan. But he had never met Stevie or interviewed him, although he had met and interviewed Jimmy Vaughan on a few occasions, starting in 94, I think, 94 or 5. So he had a relationship with Jimmy, Stevie's older brother. But he felt that to really write the kind of book that he wanted to write in terms of the quality of it and I don't know, the only word I can think of is validity, but was to ask me if I wanted to be involved, because I had interviewed Stevie 4 times, and then I became good friends with Double Trouble, and I had literally hundreds of hours of interviews of stuff, my own stuff, for over all these years. And so, I never really thought of writing a book about Stevie before that. Something happens when you get to know people. You become protective of them in a way. And the last thing I would ever want any of those guys to think was that I was trying to make a buck off of having known Stevie. And so when he died, I could have written a book then, but I thought it would have been a terrible thing to do, just for me, as my own personal feeling about it. And then all these years went by, and I didn't really think about it that much. But another thing, because all these years had gone by, we had the advantage of hindsight, and now it's been 30 years since Stevie died, and you have guys like John Mayer, a whole generation of guitar players, Eric Krasno, or even younger guy like Marcus King or Gary Clark Jr.
Yes.
Or Derek Trucks, who Stevie Ray Vaughan was like a guitar hero to them when they were 12 years old. So you could see Stevie's historical significance. It was from a different perspective 30 years down the line than if I had written the book in 1992, like 2 years after he died. You know what I mean? And so the fact that 30 years had gone by actually was a good thing, in terms of being able to make a more accurate assessment of who Stevie was as a person and his historical importance and his contributions, because you could see the effect that his music had on musicians and people over that period of time. So, so in the beginning of 2017, we started the process of putting this book together, and spent 3 years writing it. And I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say there were probably 400 new interviews that were done for the book. Plus, we were both drawing on our libraries of interviews from over the years,
right?
Which enabled, like, Alan had interviewed Albert King, and he went looking and he found a couple quotes from Albert about Stevie. But Albert died in 91, I think.
Right.
And Alan had done a long interview with Doyle Bramwell Sr., who I think died in 2011, or else the interview took place in 2011. I'm not sure, but anyway, he's been gone for a while, and it was a shame that we didn't start writing the book 5 years earlier, because there were a lot of people who passed away between 2015 and 2020. Our book came out in 2019, but um, Margaret Moser, who is a really essential writer for the Austin music scene, or Paul Ray from the Cobras, who also had a radio show, or Bruce Boland, who was the singer in Cracker Jack. These are just a small handful of people who the book would have been better if they were around. And we tried to get Stevie's wife, Lenny, to participate in the book, and we were unable to. And then she passed away right when the book was coming out, which was very sad. We tried. There were people who were trying to help us, get a hold of Lenny, and we really did want, if possible, to have her in the book, and we felt it was a little bit of a hole left that we weren't able to have her words, but I'll tell you a little story that had a lot to do with when we first got off to a rollicking start with the Stevie book in 2000. The 10-year anniversary of Stevie's passing, Alan was asked to write a cover story for a magazine called Revolver about Stevie, 10-year anniversary, and I was asked to write one for Guitar World. And so he had collected a lot of interviews and stuff at that time for that issue of Revolver in 2000. And I went down to Austin and stayed at Tommy Shannon's house, Stevie's bass player, for 3 or 4 days and just interviewed. I came home with 12 or 14 90-minute tapes. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, It's like 25 hours. I don't know, my math is not that good. It's 18 hours. And so when I came home, I looked at all the tapes and I said, if I don't transcribe everything on these tapes now, I'll never do it. And it's the only time I've ever done anything like that. Wow. So I transcribed all of it. And it was 95,000 words or something, or 65,000 words, and it was 90 pages. I don't know, something like that. Something crazy like that. But I used that to write my article, which was a long article in the magazine, but it was 5,000 words. Anyway, so we get the deal. Alan asked me if I want to write this book with him on Stevie. I say yeah. And we, embark on contacting people and doing new interviews and digging all of our old stuff up. And I'd get an email from him asking a question about some event or something, specific thing in Stevie's life. And usually I would just go to this gigantic document that I had, and I would just do a search on, if he said, do you have anything about when they played Saturday Night Live in February of '86? And I'd open the document and do a search on Saturday Night Live, and then the stuff would come up, and I would just copy it, paste it into the email, and send it to him. So he would have it in 5 minutes. And after a few weeks of this, he was like, how are you, coming up with this stuff so fast? Every time I ask you something, I get this giant thing of text from you. And I go, oh, well, I have this document. It's 65 pages or 80, whatever it is. And he's like, can you send me the whole thing? Why didn't you send me that 3 weeks ago? I was like, oh, yeah, sure. So anyway, when we went to get the book deal,
right,
usually you have to give them a sample, number of pages for them to get a feeling for the book and decide whether they want to do it. And we gave them like 125 pages, which is ridiculous. You know, people take 30 pages, 40 pages, you know, like that's considered a lot. We gave them a third of a book as our, you know, pitch to try to get the deal. They were like, "This is good," you know. So, so that's what led to the book, and it was also helpful because we could look at what we had. We both had a lot, and see what was missing. Like, you know,
Right.
oh, we don't have anything about this. We don't have anything about this. There's these big holes in the story. Aside from the obvious, which is all the early, really young stuff before Stevie was famous, which is always the hardest part of any biography because the guy is just a normal person and their life is usually not, um, you know, documented historically in any kind of a way most of the time. A lot of books leave a lot to be desired when you're reading about the person as a kid and like before they get famous. Then all of a sudden there's all this great content because they're famous. But for us, Jimmy Vaughan, it took 2 years to convince Jimmy Vaughan to come along and participate in the book, and we're very, very thankful that he did. And I had known him since '89, so I knew him for 30 years, and Alan had known him for 27 years. And, you know, Jimmy has always had, it's always been tough talking about Stevie because of Stevie's passing.
Sure.
So you have to respect that. And there was a lot of misrepresentations of their relationship, and that was the main thing with Jimmy was he felt that people had sort of made up their minds about their relationship, and I knew what he meant, and so I said to him when I was finally had the opportunity to talk to him about it. I said, listen, Jimmy, you know, like I've known you since '89 and I met Stevie in '86. I've talked to you both about the relationship between the two of you. I talked to the two of you together when we did the interview for the Family Style album. And so I feel like I have a good idea of the true nature of your relationship as brothers. And that's going to be the story in the book. And all this other stuff, you know, of sibling rivalry and bad feelings and difficult times, it's part of the story, but it'll be in perspective, at least, you know. It'll be framed in the way it should be, which is not the main point of the story. The main point of the story is how close you guys are. And then you can understand it. And any investigation of famous brothers, and Alan encountered this in writing about the Allman Brothers because of Duane Allman and Greg. And then I had the chance to become good friends with Johnny Winter. And so to talk to Johnny about Edgar and to talk to Edgar about Johnny, it's almost the same in every case, whether we're talking about Jimmy and Steve Ray Vaughan or Duane Allman and Greg Allman or Johnny Winter and Edgar Winter. To the younger brother, the older brother is the greatest thing that happened in the history of the universe. And to the older brother, the younger brother is annoying.
I don't know. I'm an only child, but yeah, I'm sure that's the case.
And so, you know, they would all say the same thing if they started to talk about, you know, stuff. They would say to me, "Do you have a brother?" And I don't have a brother. I have a sister. But and they would even say it in interviews. They would go, it's just brother stuff, you know. And it's well documented that Duane and Greg, you know, they had some major fights, arguments, a lot. And Johnny Winter was telling me once about Edgar. He said when he was 17 and Edgar was 14, something like that, or he was 16 and Edgar was 14, whatever it was, they had a band. They always had different bands when they were kids. And Johnny said to me, he goes, Edgar was the sax player in the band. He was 14. He said if the bass player didn't show up, Edgar would play bass. If the drummer didn't show up, Edgar played drums. And if the keyboard player didn't show up, he played keyboard. And he was better than any of the guys.
Really?
That was the real guy on all those instruments, but he was the sax player. So I said, wow. And this is at 14. I said, Johnny, it just sounds like, Edgar was just like phenomenally, naturally talented. And Johnny like does a pause, and then he like looks at me and he goes, no kidding. Like it was the most annoying thing imaginable. So anyway, writing the book. So what happened was when we were trying to get Jimmy involved, we were also trying to get a hold of the cousins and the family members. And then we started to get calls from them saying, Jimmy told me I should talk to you for this book, but we want you to know that we're all in shock because all these years he's always said never talk to any writers about Stevie.
Really?
And so for him to call and specifically say, you should talk to these guys because they're writing a book and they're going to, they're going to tell the story the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And then in time, Jimmy came along too. And we couldn't have written the book without Jimmy's input. There's no two ways about it. So, there's substance abuse, and there are, what's the word? Life challenges. I can't think of a better word. Difficulties that Stevie had to overcome in his life. But you won't understand the gravity of him getting sober and changing his life unless you understand what things really were like and where they came from. You know what I mean? Like it won't mean as much to you without knowing all this sort of trauma that he had gone through. So we had to try to find the balance between telling the story of that without it being salacious or, just sounding like dirty laundry and, you know what I mean? Like taking advantage of, people are going to want to read it because it's all the dirt.
Right.
So that's the thing we worked for the hardest was, you're not going to get it unless you understand the truth, but how do you portray it while making it clear that, things can go unsaid and leave it to the reader to understand. Like you don't have to lay it all out there. So that was extremely helpful. And, Stevie's parents had passed, but his aunt, his mother's sister, was alive. She's 94. And so one of her children, Stevie's cousins, said she won't, talk on the phone, but if you give me a list of questions, I'll ask her and I'll, get all the answers. And so Ann Wiley, Stevie's aunt, his mother's sister, we were able to get input from her about Stevie and Jimmy as children and, really important stuff. It was fantastic.
Well, as a reader, if I may, I think after I read the book, the most lasting impression that I had was I don't know, just to give an example or a comparison. You have that that relative that's long past, and you tell stories about this wonderful person to your kids, and it's just like you've never met them, but only if you knew them, right?
Right.
I sort of got that impression. Obviously, I didn't know him and I was too young, but my takeaway from the book was like, yes, he had faults. He wasn't perfect, but nobody is. Right. But in the end, wow, it must have been such a privilege to know Stevie, not even as a musician, but as a person, because he seemed like such a nice person, someone very, very special. And yeah, it yeah, I had a lot more respect for him just as a person because I always saw him through the lens of just as a musician, but he seemed like a very very special person. And
Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
so yeah, I think uh, approaching that with a bit of caution, I think you did a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah, yeah,
that.
because I didn't, yeah, I was just like, wow, he was a really like he was a phenomenal musician, but just the whole dynamic he had with his band and how much he truly cared for his bandmates and how he loved his brother was very, very touching.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, it was very touching. Um, did Jimmy Vaughn say anything to you after the book was released?
Did he say anything to me after the book was released?
Like, was there any feedback or anything, or from him or from his bandmates, Tommy or anything like that?
Oh well, there certainly was. um, I mean, hold on a second. When you write a book, you get
Mhm.
advanced reader copies, and so we had advanced readers, and then the purpose of the advanced readers is to send them out to all different kinds of people, literary magazines and papers and platforms, so they can give us the reviews of the book, and then also to different participants, and so then when the hardcover comes out, you can have on the back of the book these quotes from people, so they've read the book, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then when the book comes out, we already know, and the person picking up the book can see the response of the principal people in Stevie's life, how they feel about the book. And so, when you look at the back of the paperback, um, like when the hardcover came out, we didn't have all the reviews yet because it was
Okay.
still happening. But by the time the paperback came out, like the New York Times book review says, an oral history is only as good as its sources, and Texas Flood is thorough and far-reaching, with Vaughan's bandmate, crew, and family taking center stage. And then Tommy Shannon, Stevie's bass player, says, by far the best book ever written about Stevie. His whole life unfolds through these pages from beginning to end. And Chris Layton, the drummer, says, a great book. It gave me a clear outside perspective into what was the center of my life.
Mm.
And Carlos Santana said, soul brother Steve Ray Vaughan was a force of nature. His fearless, furious, and elegant approach to the guitar was breathtaking. Texas Flood helps you understand both the player and the person. Um, and Houston Press said, Texas Flood adds greatly to the understanding and legacy of Steve Ray Vaughan. Both the man and the performer required reading for any SRV fan.
Mm.
So Chris and Tommy were both very happy with the book,
That's good.
and we talked to them a lot. So like while we were writing the book, we were calling them constantly with really crazily specific questions about things like ridiculous detail and stuff. And then Jimmy to some extent, but I didn't want to bother him as much.
Right.
Chris and Tommy, I felt really close to because we become good friends over all these years. But Jimmy was cool. Like I could call him. He was like, just call me. Like if you need something, call me. And so I would. So for example, this is such a it sounds like a dumb thing, but Stevie had that crazy big Indian headdress that he would
That's
wear sometimes. And so we were trying to figure out when he started to wear it and like where it came from. And so we asked Chris and Tommy first, and one of them said, "Oh, I think it was like a birthday present from Jimmy. I don't remember where we were, but like he knew Stevie was like crazy enough to wear it on stage because Stevie loved wearing crazy stuff on stage. Like that was like a whole thing that they would talk about, how the crazy clothes and you know accessories that Stevie would wear. And so I left a message for Jimmy. I said, "Oh, we're just wondering about the Indian headdress, like if you
yeah.
know anything about it." And I was like, in a waiting room to talk to like my financial advisor or something, and my cell phone rings, and I look down, it's Jimmy Vaughan. And so I answer. I said, "Oh, hey man, thanks for calling me back. I can't talk really right now. I've got to go in and see this guy." And he just goes, "Well, you want to know about the headdress, right?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "I bought it for him for his birthday. We were in Oklahoma City." And I go, "Oh, when was that?" And he goes, it was sometime in the 80s," which in its own way is sort of like defines Jimmy Vaughan.
Yeah.
It's too funny. Like that's as specific as he could be. Like he remembers that it was for her birthday and it was in Oklahoma City. So when? Yeah, I don't know, in the 80s. It's like okay, that'll have to do. You know.
I one some of my favorite stories in the book, and I read about this a little bit. I didn't know too much about it, but I'm glad Texas Flood was more specific. Is how crazy he was with his tone, and like he would. I always knew he played 13s, but I didn't know the extent to which his fingers would just like bleed, and he had like this callus kit, and he would rip his flesh off his fingers, and it wasn't until he got sober that he was like, oh, I'm playing 11s now.
Well, the funny thing is that he really
Yeah.
just changed. He just changed the one string.
Or was
Uh,
it just that one string? Okay.
yeah, like I mean, as a means of sort of abbreviation, people would say, "Oh, I play 13s" or "I play 11s." But the reality was that he just changed the high E string, and we have the quote in the book where Doyle Bramhall Jr., Doyle Bramhall II, said to Stevie, because Stevie switched that high E from a 13 to an 11
Mm-hmm.
um, in '86, and so kind
Right.
of breaking his balls, he's like, "Hey, what's going on? Like what happened to like the heavy strings?" Even though he was just a one string, but I think that was sort of the understanding was, oh, Stevie's using 11s now, not 13s.
Right.
And Stevie said, "Oh well, when I got sober, I could actually feel my fingertips,
Right.
and it
Yeah,
was
that's
too,
the quote.
and it
Yeah.
was, and it was too painful." So an 11 for a high E string tuned down half step, it feels like a 10 or even maybe even a tiny bit slinkier than a 10. But the string has more sort of substance to it because it's an 11.
Mm-hmm.
And these are very subtle differences,
Mm-hmm.
tolerances in, foot pounds of tension and stuff like that. But, guitar players, you feel the difference. But he continued to use a 15 for a B, a 19 for a G, 2838 for the D and the A. And then the low E, he said, could be anywhere from a 52 to a 54 or a 56
Wow.
or something. It was the same. But like I use normally 10s not tuned down. So the D string and the, oh, no, that's not true. That's a 26 and a 36. So what I should say is when I play a Stevie show, tribute show, and I know I'm going to tune down, I use a set that's almost the same as his, but I'm not that much of a glutton for punishment in terms of ripping my fingers off.
Yeah.
Um, so whereas he was 11, 15, 19 for the unwound, I'm 11, 14, 18. So high E string's the same. The other next two are a little lighter. I use a 14 instead of a 15, and 18 instead of a 19.
That's pretty thick tension though, isn't it? Even on
Yeah, but when you tune it down a half step, it feels like a 14 feels like a 13, or even a little bit slinkier, a tiny bit, and an 18 feels like a 17, or even a little bit looser, but there's more string there.
mm,
And then the D and the A are the same, 28, 38, but I use a 49 on the bottom, not a 52.
mm,
So it's close, but Stevie also, you know, really liked to play on new frets, really high
Right. Yeah.
6100s, and had a lot of fret jobs. And so I couldn't even play my old guitar for about 10 years. It really needed a fret job. And so I kind of didn't play it for almost 10 years. But then about 5 years ago, something like that, I got a fret job. And so new 6100s on there. And it feels great, although they're starting to flatten out a little bit already. Um, so, but him and Jimmy, and this is in the book, like Derek O'Brien, who's a great guitar player, a Texas guitar player, who's older than both of them. He said from the earliest days, like Jimmy Vaughan and Stevie too, by extension, were really into tone. Like when people weren't talking about tone, like it was really, really important to them. And so Derek made a point of, oh, Jimmy had a, I'm gonna forget what it was. Here it is. It says, Jimmy had a great ear and can hear something and just do it, picking up licks all the great blues players. He was playing through a black Fender Bassman with a single 15-inch speaker instead of the 410s. Jimmy knew all those secrets for great tone. So he had switched out the 410s in this Bassman to 115. So then I asked Jimmy about it. So, this is what was fun. It was like all these puzzle pieces. So then I called Jimmy and I said, oh, Derek said that, you had a Bassman, but with 15, single 15. So he goes, well, if you look at the cover of Willie Nelson's Cowtown Jamboree album, which is really called Live Country Music Concert, his steel guitarist is playing through a 115 Bassman. In those days, you could send your Bassman back to Fender, and they'd recover it and change your speakers from 410s to a single 15 if you liked. It was real loud and clear. When that speaker blew up, I plugged my Silvertone my Silvertone cabinet with 610s fitted with Jensen's into the head. So he went from a single 15 to 610s. So, the heavy strings and the amps and, those guys were into tone.
Yeah.
Sam. And so that probably influenced me. That was probably the biggest influence that Stevie had on me. Because in terms of playing, I was already 27 years old or something when he came along. And so I've been playing a long time. And so my playing influences were more Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter and Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, but you couldn't deny Stevie's tone was so great. But I saw Jimmy Vaughan with the T-Birds at a tiny club in New York called the Lone Star in '82 before I heard Stevie. And Jimmy just sounded sick. It was...
Yeah.
They were phenomenal. It was
I wondered too, yeah.
Johnny Winter came down and sat in with them at the end of the night. And, so anyhow, I feel very blessed that I got to know Stevie. He was a very sweet person, and that was the most important thing that we wanted to try to communicate in the book, was what he was like. And so I could tell you that after sending the book to guys that knew him, like Eric Johnson and David Griffin, Danny Freeman, everybody said the same thing. They said, you really captured Stevie as a person.
Yeah.
So that was the most important thing, because that's the hardest thing to capture.
I think, yeah. And again, I think you were very successful, and congratulations on not only the book, but after hearing the behind the scene thoughts about what you were trying to accomplish, for being successful in that. And it's good to know that, yeah, everyone believes that you did Stevie justice in capturing who he was as a person. So
in terms of Jimmy, I could tell you that, I sent him an advance reader, and I asked him if he wanted one, and he said absolutely. And I was worried, I mean, I wanted him to like the book.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted him to feel good about the book.
Mm-hmm.
There's tough stuff in the book, there is.
It's brave.
There was
Yeah.
a lot of funny conversations. He'd call me and ask me some things, and um, like what was and wasn't in the book, and so some of those conversations were really funny. Like some like really crazy personal stuff, and I would make jokes. I'd say, "Oh no, we didn't put any of that stuff in, but obviously there's you're thinking of something, so tell me what it is. I'll put it in the book." And he would go, "No, no." And then I would say, like I'm not going to get into like super crazy personal, you know,
Yeah.
relationship stuff with women and stuff. It's like that's not what the book is for. Like that's not
Mhm.
what this is about.
Right.
And then he would just crack up. So anyway, I sent him a book, but I was still worried, because I did want him to like it. And then I went to see him. He was playing at a club in New York called Iridium. It was like 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago. And so it was between when the book came out. I sent him an advance reader. And I went backstage after the show. And I said, "Did you get the book?" And he goes, "Yeah, I read half the book the first night."
Mm.
And he's just looking at me. And he goes, "It's a nice book." And that was it. That's all we've ever talked about it. I mean, I hung out the rest of the night and we had a great night and he was a lot of fun. Um, and Jimmy's a trip. It's funny because he's a little like Dickie Betts. And these guys, I think they protect themselves by having this really sort of tough facade, which maybe you need to have once you become famous to
Right.
shield yourself from a lot of bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're very much alike in that way. But underneath that is this really beautiful, gentle person who probably needed to create this sort of purposeful, don't
Mm.
fuck with me, don't talk with me facade, because
Right.
there actually are really sweet, gentle people
Mm.
underneath. And so, but that tough exterior makes people um, afraid, or gives them pause about what to say. And to somebody like Jimmy or Dickie Betts, they know that. You know what I mean? Like it's working to their advantage.
Right.
It's like this preemptive. I'll be left alone because people are too afraid to ask me X, Y, Z, whatever. But I always said like the dumbest shit in the world to Jimmy, you know, just because I thought it was dumb, and
Yeah.
he would always laugh, like like one time that night in Iridium at the end of the night, we all came down and were standing by the doors outside, and they were waiting for the cars to pick them up to take them back to the hotel. And Jimmy had done this beautiful old T-Bone Walker song called "I'm Still in Love with" T-Bone Walker song called "I'm Still in Love with You," and his wife Robin was there, and so he dedicated it to Robin. So now we're standing down, getting ready to leave, and Robin says, "Oh, Jimmy, I just wanted to say, like that was so beautiful when you dedicated 'I'm Still in Love with You' to me. You know, it made me want to cry." And then I don't know why I said this. I said, "Yeah, it made me want to cry too, but for a different reason." And so everybody started laughing, but Jimmy like gives me this big elbow,
Oh no.
like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Like a big brother would do, right?
It's good that you two are on that level that you can actually mess around with them like that, and you'll just like I don't know if it was a
Oh, it
playful.
happens. It happens a lot. Like, and he knows that about me too. So I'll just say something so stupid to him like that, and he'll crack up, and he really, literally, looks like a big brother. Like he just gave me this big elbow, like really hard, like shut up, you know?
Oh man.
Yeah, fuck. He was cracking up. So, um, I think he knows where we were coming from with the book, and I think he feels okay about that. But it doesn't change, you know, uh, the reality that his brother died this tragic death,
Wow.
and that's very difficult for him. That's a fact. So,
Mm.
you know, I feel terrible for him that he, you know, for the whole thing. So, but the flip of that is that's why we wanted to write this book, and
Mm.
so that people could really get an accurate, hopefully, understanding of Stevie's place in music history and his importance as a guitarist, but also just here was this guy who went through all these personal struggles, made it through, and the fact that he got sober went on to inspire probably thousands of people to become sober. Still to this day,
Yeah.
30 years after his death, he's still inspiring people to become sober and help themselves in their lives, like something positive. Like, having a positive influence on people's lives years after he's gone.
Mm.
So that's a wonderful thing, like something we didn't anticipate in
Absolutely.
going into it. And that might even be the most important part of the whole story because it's more important than just playing guitar.
Yeah, because I think he really wanted to be an inspiration after he got sober. He's just like, he took it so seriously. He wanted to, it seemed like that was his main goal almost. It was
Well,
not
I
main
would
goal,
I
but
would put it. You're right, but the way I think he would say it is not necessarily to be an inspiration, but uh, to what's the word? An advocate
mm,
uh, of like he would say, you need to be aware and allow in the people around you that love you. That there are people around you that love you, and if you don't accept their love, you're cheating yourself and
right.
cheating them too. And so once you can learn to accept love, it then you can give love, you know,
Mm,
in a way that um, has much more gravity to it because you're really coming from this sincere place of taking it in and then reflecting it back out again. And
right.
we would talk about how that changed him and affected him as a musician too. Like I asked him how playing blues music, which is all about expressing your emotions, how it changed, getting sober. And he said, it just made him more committed to trying to play better,
Mm.
you know, like be more in touch with that moment. And so we all know it as guitarists and music fans. You can listen to your favorite record and there's like a note that the guy played or a moment in his voice or singing or part of the song that just kills you when you hear it,
Yeah.
you know? And why that is, like, who knows. But it's that connection, is made. And the greatest artists it was just there. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the shortest distance between them and the listener. They learn how to, whether it's B.B. King or Merle Haggard or, Willie Nelson or Jimi Hendrix. It's like bang, it's right there. So, well, I hope we've covered
I think
what
so.
we
Yeah.
wanted to cover.
I think so. You know what? I know we went way over time, but I really, really appreciate the time that you just afforded me to just be able to talk about this. It's such a trip. Just thank you so much.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. Thank you
Yeah.
for asking me, and I hope your listeners enjoy it, and I hope people will check out the book. And I
Yes.
encourage anyone to drop me a line, like I said, Andy Aledort via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and if they're interested in lessons or just to uh, just to connect, to talk about music. These are difficult times, with
Yep.
COVID. So I do wish everyone good health and hope, we can get past all this stuff and get back to some sort of life where we can all be out enjoying playing music and listening to music. And
Yeah. Yeah, we will. I mean, it's so important just to be, be able to do these things. Like we were talking out there about how important it is.
yeah, but what
And
you're doing is important too because it's keeping people connected.
thank you, thank you. Yeah, so that's Andy Aledort, and again, we'll have all of your handles where you can contact him for guitar lessons. I learned so much just by all the columns, so I would recommend it. I would highly recommend the book. So if anyone who is learning guitar or is or wants like an artist to listen to, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and also read his book. It's available in paperback and even audiobook, which is how I read it.
Oh, cool.
Uh, yeah.
And
So
the audiobook has the guys, like
yes,
Mark
yes,
Clayton,
yeah.
Shannon, Denny Freeman, Joe Priestnitz,
Hmm.
Jackie Newhouse, Stevie's bass player. They all read their own parts for
Yeah,
the audiobook, which was amazing.
yeah. I and then there's like the epilogues as well. So highly
Yeah,
recommend it. So Andy, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to finally get to meet you and talk to you. And
absolutely.
thank
The
you
pleasure
again.
is mine as well. So reach out. Feel free to reach out anytime, man.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That means a lot. All
All
right.
right.
So again, thank you for listening in, and we'll see you next time. See you later.